Yeah, if you're thinking, say, if your average sheep and beef farmer is listening to this podcast and wondering what does this mean for me? Well, the first thing is that lines companies are going to make a lot, electricity generators are going to make a lot more money simply powering money straight into the data center nearby.
Mm-hmm.
That long electricity lines heading out into rural New Zealand become less and less valuable. Well, they're already a lost leader. They're going to become more and more uneconomic. And so you can't... A massive disruption to our energy. Well, we're having a massive disruption to our fossil fuel energy system, a massive disruption to our electricity system as well. The two are not entirely unrelated. Would also really put a shock through our system.
Well, it's been a very long time since we've had our next guest on the program. Professor Hugh Campbell from Otago University joins us now. Nice to see you again. It has been a while.
Yeah,
but,
it's been a shamefully long time. But luckily, Dom, not much has happened in the world in the period of time since we last...
Yeah, there's nothing to talk about. Yeah,
virtually nothing. Yes.
exactly.
In fact, in reality, I'm slightly concerned. I don't know what the delay is going to be between us actually talking and this ending up in some online format. But if it's more than a couple of hours, we could be rendering ourselves irrelevant, by lunchtime.
Yeah, exactly. At the pace of things at the moment, but it is interesting. So I think the original impetus we're going to be talking about is the science money, for lack of a better phrase,
Yes.
where that's going and how it's been divvied up now. There's been a few changes. We have touched on it on the program, but where do you land on it?
Well, I think last time we talked about this, there were sort of signals because Sir Peter Gluckman's science sector reform report was just starting to be consulted on, and the government's response to that wasn't, to my eye, very encouraging. I thought the Gluckman report was a pretty good assessment of where New Zealand should go, but we have not gone in that direction, and now the rebalancing for impact proposal has come out with quite a dramatic set of changes, and I've been scanning the rural press, and I don't think we're looking at this quite enough. I think this is one of these issues that's snuck up on farming industries. It's not, and the outcomes are not really what I expected.
All right, well, talk me through it then. What was proposed? What have we ended up with?
So, for people who watch science sector reform closely, and I'm sure that's a large proportion of your listenership, Don.
Big time.
Yeah, so we used to have the CRI system, the Crown Research Institute system. So all the CRIs got clumped into 3 new mega entities. For us, the Primary Industries and Bioeconomy Cluster, that took in ag research, plant and food, science, all the primary sector, the big primary sector CRIs was the one where all our eyes were on and going, okay, so that's one of the 3 big ones that's going to drive a lot of stuff. But what we knew at the time of that restructuring, and when that was announced and began to be enacted through last year, was that was going to be expensive. You can't change institutions and restructure them without costing money. And so everyone was in the science sector was kind of wondering, where's the money going to come from? Is the government going to put more money into research? Is it going to set up this new Primary Industries and Bioeconomies research organisation and put a pulse of funding into it? And I must admit that I thought they would, because this has been a very farming friendly government. And as we talked last time, primary industries research has returned a lot historically on investment for New Zealand. So I thought at worst they would probably fudge it and flatline funding and make the cuts elsewhere. But what has happened is not that. So without further ado, where have we ended up? so they've ended up reorganising the funding structure. They've collapsed all the funding organisations like MB's funding arms, the Marsden Fund, the Health Research Council are all getting bodged into one. Bodged is the wrong word to use in a respectable interview. They are clustering and clumping these together into one entity called Research Funding New Zealand, following a few of the models they like from overseas, where your government gets more direct. Everything happens in a more direct and knowable way. You can coordinate strategy better with one organisation. But we were expecting the pillars around which they were going to then allocate the money to not quite be what happened. So what we've ended up with is we've ended up with 4 pillars: primary industry and bioeconomy, the one that's the key focus of our listenership, environmental sustainability and resilience. I was quite pleased that one stayed there. Healthy people and a thriving society, which will be almost entirely health funding, the old Health Research Council. And they've created a 4th one called Technology for Prosperity. And this is where everyone who watches this sector, the antenna just went straight up and went, oh, that's interesting. Because MB, which has been designing these reforms, for decades, it's been agitating, saying that New Zealand's economic and innovation base is too narrow. It's too focused on primary industry. We're too reliant on primary industry and tourism, and that we needed to diversify what we were doing. And sort of new tech sector has been sort of observed happening in other countries. Particularly, we're going to end up talking about Ireland quite a lot in this discussion, I believe. And so they've created this new technology for prosperity pillar, which is they're putting in 138 million to get this going, which is quite a substantial sum of money. And it's that they haven't funded any new money into there. They're just taking it from the other 3 pillars. And
Right.
I'm a long-suffering social scientist. I expect the social research to get butchered by this government, and they have taken $37 million out, except that's from the health and society pillar. But most of that's actually coming from health funding, health research funding. So that's a surprise. They've taken 18 million out of environmental sustainability and resilience, 18, but they've taken 56 million out of primary industry and bioeconomy.
Wow.
That was the jaw dropper, is that they really have transferred a substantial sum of money out of primary industry and bioeconomy into this new technology of prosperity. So that caught our attention, and I'm not sure whether we're really catching up particularly quickly in our political narrative or our media narrative about what they've really done. Because if I go to, or apart from yourself and Rex, if I go to probably some of the other rural media that I think is, well, I better be careful what words I say here. I go to Farmers Weekly, get generally as my litmus test as to what thinking people think about what's happening in the rural sector. And there's an article there by John Roach, the Chief Science Advisor, the dairy scientist who has now been asked to enact this reform in which we're basically defunding dairy research massively, along with other primary industry research, potentially. Alan Emerson, who does his opinion column in Farmers Weekly, he's hit the crisis button. But even the way Alan understands this technology for prosperity thing, I think, is too generous, because he's interpreting technology as being agri-technology. And this is not $138 million for agri-technology. If you look at, they do mention sort of Swizzy techs like Halter. Halter gets mentioned a lot in this strategy as being, this is what we need. To which I immediately go, and this is what we generated from the old funding system. A lot of this is about AI.
It is.
And it's about MB saying we need to rebalance the economy. They are the productive and the innovation economy. They are not talking about subtly reploughing all this back into primary industry research. They are talking about new innovations, and they are looking at New Zealand and going, what are our assets? What is the basis on which we do globally interesting science? And they're going, well, one of the things is that we generate a huge amount of cheap electricity, green electricity. We are incredibly well positioned for electrification. And so data centers.
Yes. So
And
I was,
data centers are the drivers of AI innovation. You
oh,
need to do a big AI thing. You need a data center with
yeah,
a
you do.
massive source of power right beside it.
Yes, you need land,
There you
you
go.
need
I'll take a
power.
sip. I'll take a sip from my cup and pause for breath.
Exactly. Do that, because I had Brendan O'Connell, who was the chief executive of Agritech NZ, on the show last week or the week before. We were talking largely about this, and the fact that it's interesting. You mentioned, tourism, agriculture, and what else? And this is where the discussion seems to be going now. What is the third leg of our economic prosperity going forward? And so he was obviously buoyed by the agri tech, funding boon, if you like. But that's so. In your reading of it, it's AI, it's data centers. That's where you think we're trying to.
Well, I think
Yeah.
some will definitely go to agri-tech, and I'd be surprised if Brendan wasn't excited by having one of the four pillars of government research
Oh yeah.
investment now being named technology for prosperity. But it's not. This is a rebalancing of the innovative economy towards particularly commercialization of new technology. So they mention Holter, but they talk about Peter Beck and Rocket Lab a lot.
Mm, mm.
They talk about various of our various successful software startups. So I think this is more of an earthquake in the system that when it was already quite a major reform they were launching, but this is more of an earthquake in the system than we were anticipating. And I just think it's under the radar at the moment because there's just so much else happening at the moment that's gobbling up all our attention.
So was I reading the other day that all birds gone into AI?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh no, that's a crazy story.
Yeah. I
And
was like, what is this?
well, I think their share price rocketed.
Yes.
And I think that the cynical part of me says that any company that's struggling now, and Allbirds have been struggling, the second phase of their life as a plucky new innovator had not been going well. You just have to mention AI in your prospectus all of a sudden, and money just piles in.
Yes, well, this
Um,
is one of the problems that is being spoken about offshore, is that, that people are just throwing everything into this. Like, all chips are in on this, and
yeah.
if it doesn't work, you know,
Oh,
and it's massively overvalued too, in the estimation of people who know about these things.
so the yeah, I wasn't anticipating we are going to talk about the AI boom, but this is something
Here we
that
go.
absorbs a lot of our attention at university, of course, because it's rapidly transforming tertiary education.
Of course.
And not all. Well, as with AI, extraordinary positive things at the cutting edge and massively destructive things at the kind of basic level of can we get students to write essays anymore?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so, and learning to write an essay, we think is a pretty fundamental skill. Um, so the AI boom, so it might not succeed. There might be a massive bust. This might be the dot-com boom of the
That's what I was thinking.
2020s.
Yeah.
So that's an option because they just don't land the plane in terms of certain breakthroughs. If they do land the breakthroughs, those breakthroughs are going to be massively disruptive. So effectively, if someone lands the plane on quantum computing, which increases computing power by multiples of 1,000, not by doubling every X number of months, but by multiples of 1,000. Your online banking system no longer works. Pretty well on any online commerce system no longer works because any bad actor with access to quantum computing can simply smash through all your firewalls so easily.
Mhm.
And so that's going to be both a huge step forward for that company, massive step backwards for how we manage the integrity of commerce and interaction and the like. But immediately also, the company that wins this race is going to make the other 6 companies bankrupt.
Of course. Yes.
They're going to do what they're going to experience an Allbirds phenomenon and have a great start and then fizzle and then start to make desperate claims as to why they're still relevant. So the AI thing it's like we often say to my other people in university management is that I wish all the rest of the stuff wasn't happening because we just need to be focused on AI. It's such a massive disruptive crisis in our lives, but the other stuff is happening. The other thing about AI is that if I lead us back towards New Zealand and regional New Zealand, is that excuse me, early in the morning down here in Dunedin, when I experienced the sunlit uplands of Wanaka down here.
It's nice down here, buddy.
Yeah. It's about energy generation because driving AI is remarkably energy intensive. And we already have plans for data centers in New Zealand to be positioned close to large generating sources. But this is going to become incredibly controversial. In certain niche areas, it already is. So Virginia, the state of Virginia in the United States, I saw a recent analysis of their energy system. We said at the moment, in a space of only a couple of years, 4% of Virginia's entire electricity grid has been sucked into data centers because there's a whole lot of AI innovation happening there. But they're on track at the current rate of build of data centers that they'll require 25% of Virginia's electricity.
Wow, that's incredible.
And the same thing would happen in New Zealand. We have a fantastic electricity resource, and we need lots more of the fantastic electricity resource just to meet our own aspirations in terms of what we do. And by God, if the government's putting money into high tech, we will need more energy to do that. And this really asks us questions about. One of the things I've been pondering about this is where does this leave rural New Zealand?
Yeah.
Because, if you're thinking, say, if your average sheep and beef farmer is listening to this podcast and wondering what does this mean for me? Well, the first thing is that lines companies are going to make a lot, electricity generators are going to make a lot more money simply powering money straight into the data center nearby. That long electricity lines heading out into rural New Zealand become less and less valuable. Well, they're already a lost leader. They're going to become more and more uneconomic. And so you can't... A massive disruption to our energy. Well, we're having a massive disruption to our fossil fuel energy system, a massive disruption to our electricity system as well. The two are not entirely unrelated. Would also really put a shock through our system. But at the same time, there's a huge amount of really encouraging stuff happening in terms of distributed energy generation. So, some of the people that I work with or talk to, and the person you see popping up all the time at the moment is Mike Casey, and talking about electrification, is that we now have all the technologies we need to decentralize and make our own individual farms and orchards and villages and communities energy independent. In fact, if we do it well, you end up becoming electricity generating sites that you can then sell back in. And at the moment, New Zealand is incredibly backward in this space because my brain's just going through there. Be careful what you say on air, Hugh. But it's well recognised that our electricity market structure is very challenging for us as a country. The gentailer model, where our largest retailers are generators are also retailers, really is difficult to create retail competition and drive down prices there. Perhaps our gentailers haven't been as enthusiastic as they could have been about creating new renewable energy capacity. They are building wind farms and things like that slowly, nowhere near as fast as we need. But one of the things that our regulatory structure means is that if you put rooftop solar on your farmhouse or your garage or somewhere, you get a tiny payback if you create excess power and sell it back into the grid. Australia, places like South Australia have really broken open. That was bad. Oh, came back. Sorry. I got the wheel of doom spinning on the screen
Oh, the
there for a
wheel of
while.
doom. Yeah, you don't want that. No, no. Yeah,
It might be an energy fade out
yeah,
happening.
exactly. See?
Gee,
By
have you
listening.
got a data center up there in Monaco that's
Yeah,
just been
yeah,
opened?
building one
Um,
out the back. Yeah.
so as soon as you break through the rebate, the
Yeah.
ability to sell power back into the grid at a higher price, the incentivization for us to all become little energy generators, which, oh my God, New Zealand needs us to do that because we need the electricity, is great. And it's
Mm.
nowhere better than in remote locations.
Yeah. Yeah.
In your farm, you can become not only energy independent, but you can become a manufacturer, a producer of electricity to sell to the country, not a taker of electricity down an incredibly very cost inefficient line system.
Mm.
Yeah, I think yeah we did drift off our original topic of
No,
conversation,
well,
Tom.
it's all relevant. Yeah. So, I mean, the key question is what you're saying. The average, cocky or whatever, listening to this, going, well, how does the paradigm shift or the money allocation shift when it comes to science and research and development funding? How does that affect the average, person out there grafting away every day? But as we've previously said, the thing about the agricultural research as a whole is that it's contributed hugely to what we've been able to do in an agriculture context. The
Yeah,
hand in glove.
that's right. And if you look at the sort of the background story of New Zealand R&D investment by the state, is that we are low by OECD standards. So the OECD average is 2% of GDP. The figure I would use to look at New Zealand's level of investment is 0.42%. So we're just slightly above a fifth of the OECD average. There are other figures that go around saying it's 1.5, but that's using the analysis that the government spends billions of dollars on the universities, and the universities do research as kind of what we basically do day by day. But that's not really what we're talking about here.
Mm.
That's me and all my colleagues doing what we do isn't necessarily. Some of us will do valuable things for rural New Zealand, we hope. Others will do completely different things. It's just the nature of universities. So we are very, very low. And the country that we get compared to in this initiative is Ireland. So Ireland has centralised its research council, and it's retuned its research investment to commercialisation and capability building. And so we're saying, oh, we're going to go down the Irish path. And having John Roach as our chief science advisor, he's a good Irish guy. He understands that system very well. But I would, and Ireland's actual state investment into research now is even lower than ours as a proportion of GDP,
Wow.
because they get so much commercialization income out of research.
Okay.
I I think there's one false assumption in comparing us to Ireland, and that is that Ireland, for the careful observers, is in the EU, and the EU as a total entity has Horizon Europe funding, which is the largest discovery, blue skies, platform building, science investment scheme in the world. It is a staggeringly large amount of money, and New Zealand has just become a signatory to Horizon Europe, and we're all in the business now of trying to become little partners into Horizon Europe. But Ireland sits there benefiting from all the EU investment in fundamental research, and then can just sort of take, and they take that, and then the focused funding of Irish research, of the Irish Research Council, is both how is this relevant to Ireland in a value generating sense
Mm.
commercially,
Mhm.
and also how does this fundamental research relate to the actual environment, resilience, communities, and places of Ireland. So they have a very high level of investment in environmental and kind of communities and social research as a sort of an applied thing, which definitely this new research fund from New Zealand does not. So I think New Zealand is kind of trying to run this system, but we don't have the big fundamental research platform of the EU as a thing that we're part of. It's like, where do we get that fundamental research?
Yeah,
If I
where
was
do
to,
we get that?
well, we do. Um, we do as best as we can because we are internationally connected researchers. I collaborate with researchers in Norway and Switzerland and places like that. So
Sure.
indirectly, we are an internationalized university sector and a well, PRO sector, as it's now called. And so we do sort of hodgepodge go in there. We're trying to become hooked into a Horizon Europe, but I'm not, and I don't think we're rocketing ahead with that. It's not been it's frustrating because we are trying to build those partnerships, but it hasn't been a priority area for MB. MB's had all its energy taken into this set of reforms that we're talking about today. So we could build a better connection to Horizon Europe. That would be very good for us. They spend a massive amount of money on rural and farming research.
Yeah, which is what we've kind of, which is okay. So where do we go? What happens now then with the division of the money as you've described? What could be the implications? Do you think? And we are we going down the road of throwing everything into this AI thing? Are we? We're just throwing all the chips into that.
Yeah, so we've already, as last time we talked about the science sector reforms, the toll we were up to 400 to 500 scientists having left
That's
overseas.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the New Zealand Association of Scientists says we're now up to 700,
Wow.
and it's not that big a sector. So we have stripped scientists are leaving, and they have left. So we are degrading our capability in a lot of areas where we have been strong. And I think the ones that worry me are the kind of the baseline work on biosecurity. I know not everyone wants there to be environmental monitoring because it doesn't necessarily come up with good news. But my point is that you need the environmental monitoring because you actually need to know the bad news, or the good news if there's good news. Otherwise, you just don't know how to act. So those things are a bit of a challenge. And at the university level, we are all now in this absolute ferment of pivoting towards this new research agenda. And it's going to be as hard for universities as it is for the new PRO organizations because, you hire and train scientists through their PhDs and postdocs and on they come and then they develop careers. And then you're just going to tell a bunch of talented scientists in their 30s and 40s, well, we're now going to do something completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. Seems
And
absolutely
what,
bizarre. I've been reading stories.
and what they do is go overseas.
Yeah, exactly. There was something on RNZ that I was reading. Might have been, I can't remember if it was this morning or yesterday. And it was actually, well, it went into some pretty dark areas, put it that way, of the upshot to scientists that are facing at the moment. And financial ruin and things like that. I didn't quite realise
Yeah.
the extent of how bad the landscape was for that.
Yeah, this is when I want to be mean to my staff because universities are under a lot of pressure at the moment, and then I put up the graph of what's been happening to the actual research sector. It is odd, and I wonder there may be a change of government later this year. I actually don't think it's going to happen, but for reasons. But there may be a change, and I don't. I'm not 100% convinced that if a Labour-led government took power, they would see this as a key area that they had to rush in and change.
Yeah, I don't think so. No,
It's
no one's
very
talking about it.
expensive.
No one's talking
Yeah,
about it.
yeah, that's right. It's very expensive to reform and restructure your science sector. They might change, they might change the weighting of the funding priorities, but they're not going to go and start unpicking this. I don't think they're going to go and if they got elected, I don't think they would go in and start unpicking this. So, and I suppose, Dom, I mean, sitting underneath that observation you just made, which is that none of the major parties seem particularly enthused about this area, is a really challenging, deeper question about where we're traveling as a society and where politically we're traveling as a society. Because you don't need to read international surveys of the kind that I obsessively follow online to see that the general trust in science has been declining over the
Mm,
last How long? Well,
Oh,
pretty well since most people began getting some people began getting a majority of their news online, not through traditional media
yeah.
or education sources.
That plus COVID, you put those two things together.
And then COVID supercharged it.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, it was
Yeah,
already
and so
starting, and then it was like, oh, okay, right, bang, we're away. Yeah.
yeah, and so I think this is a challenging thing for farming leaders to think about. At the moment, the new minister in charge of this is Penny Simmons, who I'm just going to say this is not her priority. Her priority is in the polytech sector and workforce training. That's what lights Penny's fire, not the nature of our research investment in universities and PROs. And I just sense that there's just a diminishing number of votes in science.
Mm,
Um, and that's really concerning, well, it's certainly concerning for me, um, and for the entire institution that I'm going to leave at some stage in the future, hopefully in a reasonably healthy state. But on where farming leadership lands on this, I think is very tricky. And we're in a very challenging space on that, because if you went back 30 years, the relationship between farming leadership and our major science institutions was extremely strong, and the government provision of science funding was very strong. That alliance was at the heart of sort of the success story of New Zealand farming, and that, I think, at one level for farming industries, that's great when science is primarily focused on increasing productivity. The growing more grass dynamic in science that we've done so well in New Zealand
mm.
over a long period of time.
Oh, it served
Um,
NZAG well. Yes, very well, beautifully.
the problem is that science keeps evolving, and one of the things that began evolving in science was the ecological sciences, which began sounding warnings, saying, systems have boundaries, there are thresholds you can't pass, and so eventually you can't just keep producing more. Eventually, you can't just keep putting more nitrogen on pastures without there being side
Consequent.
effects.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're going to break through thresholds, and there are going to be serious consequences. And so ecological science is a much harder sell politically, because it's just much easier for the current government to say we're going to come up with lots of bright ideas for lots of people to make more money. Um, Not much harder sell, and I don't think there's much appetite for the alternative in the Labor Party as well at the moment. I don't hear much particularly interested science or the funding of climate change research and the like. No one out on the left side of politics is beating the drum for an attack on recalcitrant farmers for not going in, for not doing enough on climate change. It's just, that's not an issue.
Yeah.
Those things are not high priorities at the moment, and they're kind of in the awkward questions basket in politics that everyone thinks, well, we know we have to solve these things in the long term, but I just don't want to think about it in the short term.
Mm. It's interesting, the political landscape, though, because it just seems everywhere you look, you talk about, the institutions, the lack of trust in science, the lack of trust in politicians and politics in general. God, that would have to, I don't know if it's worse or not, but it's at least on a par. Because I'm the traditional people that I would have spoken to over the years who are just like all in on, they want a national led government, no secret about it. But even the people are just questioning everything now, and it seems like dissatisfaction is the prevailing thought. Just no matter where you land politically, it's just you're
Yep.
dissatisfied in a general sense.
Yeah, no, it's not an inspiring moment politically. I think that's no secret, and it may be. I mean, in my own mind, I try and disentangle the long term trends from short term effects, and we are. Admittedly, we're in the middle of a couple of cycles of very intense short term effects that have really disrupted and destabilized things. And so, COVID we don't even want to think about COVID now, and yet it was the most disruptive and transformative event we'd had in a generation.
Mm.
And now this oil shock, by the time this goes to air, it might be over. I'm telling you, it won't be.
Yeah, no, it won't be. There's no
But
way.
people will be claiming in all sorts of directions. It's another shock, and we. And I think, in terms of the evolution of our political systems, I mean, I've talked about this a lot before. Um, personally, I'm a supporter in principle of MMP as a political system. I think I think it's better for your politics that everyone's vote counts,
Mm,
not just 20 marginal electorates somewhere and
yeah,
everything else
yeah.
is just locked in.
I
I think,
tend to agree. Yeah.
yeah, and you look at the United States and go, that's just cray-cray over there. And part of it is that there's no jeopardy in their political system. They've engineered it so that there are entrenched political parties that it will just never change. And so MMP is more fluid than that. But I think what I've talked about before with you and others is that the way in which MMP recruits party list MPs in an era of the internet has really changed. And so, if you're a keyboard warrior online with impeccable political thoughts and great attack lines on the others, you're much more likely to rise and potentially become an MP. And that's a fun person to have around. They're not potentially very useful as an MP or a cabinet minister. And so I look at some of the actions that the current government took in their first weeks in power when they did a whole lot of slashing and burning under urgency of a number of things that I suspect, if you were to get them in an honest moment, they would say, perhaps we moved a little quickly on that. They probably shouldn't have cancelled the ferries by text. But, at the time, there was a sense of which we have to reward everyone online who's been clamoring for these radical actions to be done. And there weren't enough kind of people with sensible background experience in a political organization or a large company or organization. And the the one who's there, who was the CEO of a large organization, hasn't been extremely successful. um, so they are, I may just becoming a grumpy old curmudgeon, but when I look at the front bench of the current government and also the shadow front bench of
Mm,
the opposition, I don't see the depth of practical talent there that I would have seen 20 to 30 years ago. And for
100%.
rural New yeah, and I think this is partly informed, rural, of course, is always ahead of the trend, and so we've sent a lot more farmers to Parliament this time. That helps. It can help depending which farmers you send to Parliament. And I have a lot of time for some of them. Um, but others basically have arrived by being keyboard warrior agitators, making claims that just can't possibly be fulfilled and disappointing their supporters. So we are in an odd period, and it's unusual in New Zealand for a first-term government to be struggling this badly.
Yeah, I was,
This is not how New Zealand politics works.
mm. I mean, there's a long way to go till November, but it has been interesting. And all the talk about Luxon and everything like that. I mean, that never works, changing a leader at this stage in the game. I don't think. So I
Um,
don't know. I,
you
I,
have to have someone very charismatic
you
waiting in the wings, and
you
so
got to have a
Labor pulled it off
compelling
in
replacement.
2017.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but that was like the exception that proves the rule. This is, 9 times out of 10, changing a leader doesn't effectively change how people are feeling about it, because your leader is the person who, people who watch the news a lot or listen into the radio or drive time, that matters to them.
yeah.
But politics is much more driven by underlying conditions. Are people feeling wealthier? Do they think the country's generally going in the right direction? Um, does this align? Well, given that the characteristic of politics increasingly over the last 15 years has been negative partisanship, which is that you don't so much love your own side as hate the opposition, the other side. And so has the opposition given you less grounds to hate them that you're really annoyed with your current incumbents? It's weirdly disorienting times. And I think I saw one of the most recent opinion surveys. It's only 1,000 sample of 1,000. So you social scientists are always a bit skeptical about those things getting too fine grained. But what I noticed was that one of the questions they'd asked was about, do you think climate change is a real issue? And for at least one of our parties in government, the vast majority of their supporters said no,
Mm.
which was a change. climate change issues with climate change tended to be a concern of a minority of the population. That minority has got a lot larger now, and it's much more influential on our current government, which is why I think a lot of my concerns about where we're positioning farming for the future, those questions have stopped being asked, and we've stopped discussing them because this current government really has no real concern about it.
Yeah,
We're not.
that's been evident, and that's been a criticism that's been levelled at them, fairly regularly. I just don't think they care. Like that doesn't seem to, with
No,
the
it's not. It's
electorate,
not an issue for them. Yeah,
exactly, because the electorate doesn't resonate, which I guess just reinforces the point you're making.
yeah, and I don't actually think it's a particularly big issue for the Labor Party either.
Mm.
You look
Although
at what
you
they're.
did say, I think you did say though that it's becoming, I guess, generally more of a thing. But yeah, well, I don't know. So what is it then? If you're saying the electorate kind of has picked up, it's more of a thing for people surveyed in polls or whatever, than it was, maybe a decade ago. But if the politicians aren't,
Oh
they,
no. I
no?
didn't explain it well enough. No, climate change not being a problem has become bigger in the
Oh,
polls.
right. Yes, right. Okay, right.
Yeah,
Yes, okay, not
yeah.
yeah. Well, that makes
No,
okay.
that's right.
So
I
therefore,
don't use the term climate change denialist because I think that's not a helpful term to use. But people who don't think this is an issue or think it's a fraud or a hoax or conspiracy by scientists, that proportion of the population has significantly increased since
gotcha.
COVID.
Yeah,
And that really sits at the heart of how you think about farming, the environment, positioning us for the future. It's just taken all the air out of the tires of a whole lot of things that we were trying to do. We haven't quite repealed the Zero Carbon Act yet, but I'm not sure that this government or a potential next government is acting in particularly good faith about making steps towards becoming carbon zero. Even though, as Mike Casey shows us, it's entirely possible for us to do this. And it's entirely, if you can find the right. For those dairy farmers out there wondering how to spend their very large check they've been receiving, how about looking at massive creating energy resilience for your outfit by putting solar panels, batteries, electrifying as much of your machinery as possible, and then putting at least one little piece of not such good pasture into solar panels and selling power back into the grid. That would be great. That's a really good model.
that's your wish. If you could financially advise Fonterra shareholders as to what to do with their money, that's what it would be.
Yeah, to be honest, I shouldn't be facetious about that. It's like, given the hugely concerning amount of private debt sitting in primary industry in New Zealand, for God's sake, people, pay down your debt. The other Hail Mary pass sitting out there, which I think this government probably was anticipating playing in the next few weeks, and it's come off the rails slightly, is the free trade agreement with India.
Of course.
Because we all know that the free trade agreement with China was so transformational for primary industry and the whole economy. That the China free trade agreement was basically, we are going to become a most favored food supplier to China. We're going to send a heck of a lot of food. It changed primary production in New Zealand dramatically. But this free trade agreement with India does not do that. I mean, the clauses around it is not a food trade agreement. India is extremely protective of its farmers. And I think for people who are reading, who can see the fine detail of the agreement, and there's a lot of it's being kept very close to their chest. And you can see how normally free trade agreements is the one thing that most of Parliament gets in behind. And I would have expected, well, the ACT and National are okay with the free trade agreement, but I would have expected New Zealand First and Labor to be in behind a free trade agreement. But it's gone rocky, and it's partly because it's not beneficial for farmers. This free trade agreement, we are not going to suddenly have unfettered access for animal proteins into India. There's some tiny little windows that are not game changers. There's talk of large amounts of investment into India of a nature that we haven't named what it is. And then, of course, Winston is beating the drum around immigration and student visas and things like that, because It's an election year, and that's what he does.
And he's the master.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, he knows when to.
Oh, he knows. He's
Yeah.
yeah, of course. Yeah.
He's done this. He has done this before. This is
Oh,
not
he's
his
done
first
this.
rodeo.
Exactly. So it's interesting. So yeah, because obviously New Zealand First won't vote. So to get it across the line, they're going to need Labor
They're going
Party.
to need Labor.
Yeah,
They're
which
going to need Labor. They
really
really
interesting.
should.
Yeah,
And I think, I mean, yeah, the fact that Chippy hasn't come on board and said this is a no-brainer. Of course, we're doing this. Yeah, no, this is another thing that's flying under the radar because of all the kaleidoscope of cray that's out there dominating our
yes,
attention in the
yes.
world at the moment. If kaleidoscope of cray is the official media term for it.
So who benefits out of the India FTA should it proceed?
Good question. It will allow some more freedom of, well, maybe we're looping back. Maybe it's the mysterious technology for prosperity sector that we're about to start investing in.
I did wonder because the reason I asked that, and it's always been the thing. I remember talking about it maybe a year, 18 months ago, whatever it was. It's like you won't get the FTA with India was completely. It was like a unicorn. You'd never get it. It
Yeah,
was
yeah,
dairy.
yeah.
Dairy it was the major stumbling block. It's like, well, they produce their own. They
Yeah.
don't need pesky New Zealand coming in with their
And that
dairy.
will continue.
Yeah,
Yes.
yep, that's right. The only thing I can think of, and you say unnamed, sort of sources. Yeah, it's wow. I mean, one can
There's
have a
not.
full conclusion if there is no information available.
Yeah, I mean, all the big free trade agreements we've been involved in, particularly the Uruguay round of GATT that created the World Trade Organization and China. The predominant benefit to New Zealand has been access to markets for export products.
Yeah,
But there have actually been a number of other things that came out of them as well that sort of were small clauses and things. The nature of harmonization and standardization of things to facilitate trade happening does open up possibilities for things we don't know about yet. But really, I think the Winston problem with this free trade agreement, which and one of the reasons why we do laugh and say this is election year, so he's beating the drum about immigration. New Zealand does have a big immigration challenge, and it's not that we are being flooded by immigrants. It's just that this is a massive issue for particular political constituencies in America or Europe, and so all Winston's potential voter base sees this online all the time. But New Zealand, our workforce challenge is of a completely different nature. We're an aging population. We have significant demographic challenges about. Maybe I will get through my older decades and there'll still be someone available to wipe my bum. But Dom, by the time you are retired or well into retirement in a care home, there will, as things currently are trending, there'll be no one there to work there. There'll be no
that's
one
very rare.
available. Or
Yeah,
maybe,
100%.
hopefully you'll be retiring in Wanaka, so maybe there will be an incentivized workforce of Brazilian backpackers to help out in your moment of need. But we do have we have a major series of workforce challenges. And so to avoid becoming the Japan of the South Pacific, and Japan is a country that just has the most terrible future scenarios ahead of it because they are rapidly anti-immigration.
Mm.
And New Zealand needs the immigration of skilled workers and skilled future citizens. And India is actually a huge supply of that.
Yeah, exactly.
They have a huge education sector. They have, and in terms of rapidly emerging developing world economies, India is becoming a powerhouse. And in 50 years' time, will be a massive economic powerhouse for us to be engaged with constructively. But the level of English competence is extremely high, as we know from all our PhD students who come in from India. They're what shall I say, more fluent English speakers than a lot of our homegrown product. So English is the language of technical skill, trade, success, business, government. So this is a massive workforce for us to begin aligning ourselves with.
What a
Uh,
fascinating landscape. It is.
It is. It is. Is there anything we didn't talk about yet, Dom?
Not really. I mean, one of the things that you did mention there, and I've just been, and you mentioned Ireland before, and it's just, yeah, it's the way that their farmer protests have been going at the moment. You don't see a lot of mainstream coverage of it, really, but you just have a look around the social media sites, and maybe that's the problem. But yeah, what's happening in Ireland's absolutely fascinating at the moment. I
Yep.
don't know if you've kept,
And
yeah,
and the Netherlands,
yes, yeah,
and other parts of Europe. So we are living in through the age of what academics would call populist farmer
exactly.
uprising or
It,
discontent.
it all seems
Um,
so unsustainable, though, because it feels like it's going to reach a some sort of boiling point. Although it may just fizzle out all the same, but it just doesn't feel like that.
no, and all political movements sit and contest across a spectrum of populist to what you might call institutionalist, or institutionalists are like, the state, the economy are highly technical, challenging areas to manage and operate. So we must, in good faith, engage in all those things and do our best to make potentially complex systems work better. Through to populist, which is, we hate stuff that's going on. We want you to symbolically tell us you're going to change all that, even though you won't. And the populist tendency that's animated a bit of New Zealand farm politics recently, where does it take us?
Yeah,
It makes people feel good online. It makes
yeah,
people feel they've got enemies out there that they must fight against, even if those enemies are often imagined or created, or crafted by algorithms to feel much more enemy-like than they actually are.
exactly.
And New Zealand farming has always prospered by massively productive engagement at an institutional level. So it's good having more farmers in Parliament. It's good having more farmer engagement with, if you have more farmer engagement with big organisations. But your dairy NZs and your meat and lamb, New Zealand, your beef and lamb New Zealand, and all those kinds of sectoral organisations and the kinds of things, they have to be okay to engage with government.
Yeah,
And to engage in good faith. And so I think, in terms of that relationship between farming leadership and government, we're still living in the wreckage zone out of the collapse of He Waka Eke Noa, which was the largest kind of attempt to create an institutional set of alliances between groups to collaborate on a set outcome.
wow, I haven't heard that phrase or title.
Like for a while.
Yeah, He Waka. I haven't heard that
No, and
for a long
sort of,
time.
He Waka Eke Noa turned out to be extremely susceptible to being taken down by populist politics. But populist politics hasn't brought up some alternative for us, which is better or even viable at the moment. It's just at the moment making people feel better. And if you're in certain sectors of the economy, you're doing okay in export markets at the moment. Long may that last.
Long may it last, indeed. Lovely to catch up again. It's been a lot of fun. We covered a lot of ground on that, so appreciate it. We'll see you in Wanaka next time, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. Loved to talk, Dom. And yep, stay warm and enjoy yourself up there, whatever you're doing.
As always, thanks for watching the program. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we've got new episodes for you every Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday.